What is the impact magnitude to supply chain disruptions?
Yes, great to talk with you, Anders. We look at global supply chain disruptions, and the impact is quite large. We saw this during the COVID-19 crisis, where we looked at firms that were very reliant on Chinese suppliers and asked around the world, what is the impact on the local firms? And we saw a very large impact given how integrated the supply chains are around the world and how much people depend on China for many things, not just toys, but also electronics and also many natural materials as well.
And those are they still affecting us today?
They still are, and it varies by industry. A lot of it might be raw materials, rare earth materials now are a big concern. So the actual sectors change, but still the reliance on China is still there. And firms are trying to what we call de-risk their supply chains and actually move production to additional countries so they're not just dependent on one country or one region like Asia to minimize the risk of this disruption.
Do you have any examples of companies doing that?
Yeah, there's a great example is Apple, and Apple is now moving production increasingly to India because there are new iPhones being produced there. If you ordered an iPhone back a couple years ago, you might have had to wait an additional length of time just because all the iPhones were made in China. And now we see increasingly a larger fraction being made elsewhere.
Talking about supply chain disruptions or supply chain shocks, which type of firms and companies are responding better to those?
Right. We look at in which industries, and if you have a very competitive structure versus you're more insulated, maybe more of a monopolist. And you might think, well, the monopolist or the firm which has closer to a monopoly has higher profits and they might respond better. We find out it's exactly the opposite. It's in the competitive industries where firms maybe are lean and mean and used to responding to shocks that we see a better response. They're able to respond quickly, and maybe if your margins were initially high, you kind of think, oh, this is going to go away. And maybe in the long run, you don't do as much, and you kind of, what we call sometimes there's the, call it fat and happy firm versus the lean and mean firm. And so those ones with higher margins actually take a longer time to adapt to these disruptions.
So if you have any suggestions for those who are running companies within the supply chains industry, what would you recommend them?
I think firms are more and more realizing they have to go, it's called de-risk the supply chain. So you have to figure out, you want to make sure you have several suppliers for every key component. So you make sure you're not overly dependent on 1-2 suppliers. So, and this is common sense. You need to diversify your supply chain, so you might have 15 different suppliers of your key component in different countries as well. Make sure it's in different countries, and then kind of uncover the hidden links. Because sometimes, for example, if you move production to Vietnam, but it's still being sourced from China, you still have the exposure to China, even though you've moved production to Vietnam. So make sure you fully understand the full length of the supply chain and your dependency.